Why don't we bring in our political panel for today? And joining us this week, Labor MP and member for Dunkley, Peter Murphy, is in Melbourne. Welcome back, Peter. And Liberal MP and member for Sturt, James Stephens, is in Adelaide. Welcome to you too, James. It does seem, Peter Murphy, to you first of all, that governments change, but the questions kind of remain the same when it comes to electricity planning and reliability in this country. Talking, of course, about the latest AEMO report casting forward to 2027. Peter, did it cause you any alarm? A lot has to go right, it seems, for us not to have the risk of blackouts, unreliability around that time.
Yeah, I mean, you're right that questions do remain the same. And the question of transitioning to renewable energy, having an energy security plan, looking to the future was one of the big questions in the last election. And in my view is why Australia chose to change governments. This latest report, I mean, we should be clear, it actually says that reliability in Australia's electricity market has improved. Of course, there's more to be done. And in fact, more has been done that isn't included in that report yet, including significant investment in large-scale batteries, negotiation of deals with a number of states on rewiring the nation, the negotiation of mechanisms for reliability. So, yes, more has to be done.
Yeah, but some of the key words...
it has to be done as rapidly and responsibly as possible.
Sure, but some of the key words you mentioned there... Yeah, some of the key words you mentioned there, Peter, sorry to talk over you, verbs that are negotiating, you know, they're not actually digging or concreting or wiring. They're kind of high-level intergovernmental agreements. Isn't the history of this area that sometimes projects that are planned are just not delivered or are delivered much later and far more expensively than originally envisaged?
That has been the history, and unfortunately the recent history over the last 9 or 10 years is a lack of action, and some would say complete inaction. We've been in government for 9 months, and no one can say anything other than Chris Bowen as a minister and the whole government has been moving as rapidly and as is responsible in that time. And we have put in place both legislation and negotiated deals. That means that shovels will be in the ground and things will be built, and we will be moving forward really soon. All right. That's all you can ask us as a new government to do, is deliver the things we promised we would deliver. OK,
why don't we throw that over to James then, Peter. James Stephens, do you cut them some slack? 8.5, call it 9 months. Not a whole lot of time to turn the ship around on what we all know has been a, tale of woe, really, on energy in this country for at least a decade now.
Well, Greg, I think the problem is we know what Labor's plans are into the future, and they won't deal with this dramatic exodus of generation. The New South Wales example is the latest. It occurred in my home state of South Australia, of course, 6 or 7 years ago, and the whole energy grid went down for 4 hours. So by Labor saying they're merely going to do what they said in the election campaign is a frightening confirmation that they've got no solution to these new problems that are being raised every day, which is a lack of consistent, reliable, dispatchable electricity generation. And whilst major generators are slated to leave, these little band-aid solutions that the Labor Party are proposing are just going to leave us with a very vulnerable electricity grid in a situation like we had in South Australia, where people can't be confident that when they turn the lights on, electrons will come zapping down the line. And that's just not acceptable in a first world country, and it's particularly not acceptable for the businesses that are counting on reliable energy generation in this economy, in this grid, to support their activities.
And what do you predict is going to happen with some of those slated closures then, James? Do you think a question mark sits around some of the larger coal-fired assets, particularly in New South Wales, which were going to be shut down at a faster pace than originally planned? But, as we've been discussing on the program, you've got Snowy Hydro running late. What do you say is likely to happen there?
Curry as well. Yeah, well, look, the government have shown they'll undertake knee-jerk reactions to problems that were anticipatable, and no doubt there'll be some kind of dramatic intervention. Maybe the government will take these plants over when they realise that the gap hasn't been filled by their virtue signalling policies, and that'll be the worst of all worlds, frankly, because we want to see a credible and managed transition to a net zero economy by 2050. But what the government are proposing to do is not clearly, and AEMO have admitted this just in the last few days, they're not putting the plans in place to address this gap in generation. So I think we're going to have a perverse circumstance where we could have some of these coal plants have to be kept alive for longer than was intended because the planning hasn't been done to replace them, and then we're going to have emissions going up, which is just ludicrous.
Well, let's see. We'll stay in touch. Yeah, go on, Peter.
Greg, can I just say it is important, like everything that was James just said then was rhetoric. It's important to remember that AEMO report has said that already reliability in the national electricity market has improved. You know, it is moving in the right direction. They're not Band-Aid solutions. We're rewiring the whole electricity grid because it wasn't done. And investment in transition to renewable energy is well on the way. But go back to that fundamental point. Sure, there's more to be done, but reliability has already improved. And we shouldn't lose sight of that.
All right, point taken. Peter, I might wind you back in to lead off on this one. Super tax concessions seem very much on the cards, I would have thought, from what the Prime Minister said today and what Jim Chalmers said yesterday. What is it we're looking at here? Just a little bit of a trim in at the top end. We're talking here, are we, Peter, about people with $7, $5, $3 million worth of super? You're comfortable with taking away some of the generous benefits around that?
Well, what we're consulting on, as we said we would, is legislating the objective of superannuation to make sure it is what it was intended to be, a mechanism to deliver retirement in dignity and in an equitable and sustainable way. I find it extraordinary, really, that it seems incapable, some people in this country, to engage in a conversation about what needs to be done in parts of our economy and parts of our system in an adult way. And as soon as the Treasurer sort of says, we're consulting on an objective, and these are the things we need to think about when it comes to superannuation and equitable and sustainable, people start yelling about taxes and about taking money away from people.
But doesn't it mean that, Peter?
Can't we have conversations anymore in this country about big picture reforms?
But when policymakers use those words, equitable and sustainable, Peter, it translates into, tangible decisions on policy.
Sure.
We are talking about tax, aren't we?
Well, we are talking about the superannuation system, and we're talking about making sure that it's equitable and sustainable. And there may well need to be changes made at some point, but can't we have a rational conversation about it without, it having to turn into a he said, she said, or a big scare campaign about taxes? Can't we say this is how the system is working, this is how it should be working, and let's talk about what changes people might consider need to be made?
Yeah, well, why shy away, James Stephens, from a rational adult conversation as Peter invites the nation to enter into? You up for that?
Well, Greg, on the last topic we were discussing, Peter said that the government should implement the plans they took to the election. Now she's saying that they should reinvent all of the commitments they made before the election and suddenly introduce the spectre of dramatic change to retiree policies, which Labor made a very significant deal of ruling out during the campaign. After the 2019 set of promises, they were very wary in 2022 to rule all this out. Within 12 months of an election, it's all back on the table again. I'm not surprised, but I'm really disappointed because there are a lot of people out there that took Labor at their word, that they could be trusted not to raid the superannuation and retirement savings of Australians that have saved that money to provision for their retirement, and now we've got them deciding after an election that that's a big pot of money they want to get their grubby hands on, and I certainly will be a part of a coalition
This
resisting
is
that
the reaction I
all
was
the way to
talking
the
about.
next election.
All right, James, I think we're getting a tone, Peter, James and Peter, we're getting a tone of where this conversation might go. It does sound somewhat familiar.
And it shouldn't have to go there. It shouldn't have to be like that. But
All right.
Anyway.
Well, it may
don't
be.
really
Either way, you can be certain that we'll revisit it with both of you. Time, alas, has beaten us today. Really appreciate your involvement as always. And I dare say that is a particular subject we will be returning to with both of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
Thanks.
James.